The gate to the motor inn opened. Carly, Wyatt, and Ben had returned from St. John's. So what it's like over there? Is it as safe as they claim it is? Lily asked. Carly was carrying a basket of biscuits with her. Everyone could tell that the biscuits were by that sweet aroma. Yeah, it's actually pretty nice over there, Carly said. It's like it's been untouched. She handed the basket to Lily. Is it safe? Lily asked. As far as we could tell, yeah, Wyatt said. Okay, we'll head on over there, Lily said. Wyatt, Ben, and I can keep the motor in while you're gone, Carly said. We can? Ben asked. I mean, Wyatt and I can keep an eye on the motor inn, Carly said. That sounds more accurate, Wyatt said. Ben crossed his arms over his chest and frowned in response. Okay, thanks. Everyone else, get ready for the trip over, Lily said. Actually, Lee said, Vince and I are going to hang back with the babies because we don't know these people at all. If you can, just get our meal to go. Larry then glared at Lee and said, So you're going to starve those girls because you won't want them to be fed by other people, is that it? It's not like that. If everything goes well and we get a trade set up between the St. John's and ourselves, then at some time in the future we'll take the girls over. But not right now, Vince said. Not when we barely know these people. You two make me sick. You have the chance to feed them, but you'd rather let them starve instead, Larry said. We're more worried about their safety, you fucking asshole, Vince said. Larry gritted his teeth and he got to Vince's face. Don't test me, Larry hissed. He then turned to Lee and said, And don't forget that I know who you really are. We're not going, Lee snapped at Larry, and you aren't taking the girls with you either. Otherwise, this is going to get violent. He placed a hand over his handgun. Larry just glared at Lee and said, If they die from hunger, we'll know who to blame. Just get going, Lee said. He did his best to keep himself calm, but the older man was trying his patience. Come on, Dad, let's just get to St. John's, Lily said as she gave Lee and Vince a glare. She didn't like that they were arguing with him. However, neither man cared. I'll ask them if we can bring you back something to eat, Katja said to Lee and Vince. Thanks, we appreciate it, Vince said. Yeah, thank you, Katja, Lee said. Katja nodded and went over to the group. All right, we'll be back. Carly, keep an eye on things, Lily said. After all, I can trust you. Her last set of words were in a dark tone, which was aimed at the men. She didn't like that Vince and Lee were arguing with Larry. Plus, she knew Wyatt was a recreational drugs moderately or at least used. Finally, she barely knew Ben. Yeah, whatever, Carly muttered. She clearly didn't like Larry because of all the fights he caused, but he did respect Lily, but barely. Lily then turned her back to the group and led everyone else to St. John's. Wyatt and Vince pushed the dumpsters into the place the group left. So, you two don't trust the St. John's? Carly asked. Vince and Wyatt came back over. Not enough with the girls, Lee said. I have to admit, it felt like they were hiding something. I mean, you don't see people like that anymore, Wyatt said. It might be just my paranoia talking, but I just don't trust them. I don't know. They seem like good people, Ben said. Carly pondered with the words and said, Wyatt, Ben, you two be ready to head out around 8. Carly, Ben asked. Just in case, they should be back around 8. There's no reason why they should be out for that long, Carly said. All right, that sounds reasonable, Wyatt said. Okay, what about Lee and Vince? Ben asked. They'll stay and look after the girls, Carly said. Vince sighed and he said, I would go on watch, but Danielle might wake up at any time now, and I don't think she'll be too happy if someone other than me greets her. That's fine. You have the responsibilities now. Let us pick up some of the work, Carly said. I'll teach Ben how to do watch. We'll have shooting some other day, Carly said. She gestured the teenager how to follow her, and then they went on top of the RV. It wasn't long until Lee and Vince could hear a faint crying from the room. I guess that's your cue, Wyatt said. I'm gonna go chill on the couch. Alright, we'll probably be over in a bit, Vince said. Wyatt then walked over to the couch while Vince and Lee walked to the room that the toddlers were in. I'm going to guess that Danielle and since Clementine would usually climb out of the crib and go find you if you forget to check on her. Yeah, hope they got enough sleep, Lee said. Vince opened the door and the two men entered the room. To their surprise, both girls were crying. Hey, Vince said. He went over and picked up Danielle. Shh, it's all right, Vince said as he cradled the girl in his arms. Lee picked up Clementine and started to comfort her as well. It's all right, sweet pea, Lee said. It didn't take long for the girl's cryings to be turned into whimpers. Clementine was easier to calm down than Danielle. Vince had to comfort her longer. You okay? Lee asked as he held the toddler. She loud. It made my ears hurt, Clementine said. She's a bit younger than you, honey. That's probably why she could only get out of the only way to get out of the crib, Lee explained. Although it wasn't exactly true, since Danielle was old enough to yell out names, Lee still didn't want to confuse Clementine. She wouldn't understand the concept of trauma. You ready to go out and play? Lee asked. Clementine smiled and nodded her head. All right, let's get to it, Lee said as he placed the toddler on the ground, and she ran for the door. Lee and Vince followed, but Danielle chose to remain in Vince's grip. He was no longer cradling her. Instead, he carried her more like a toddler. She also had a pacifier in her mouth. The two men went outside the play area, where Clementine was coloring. Wow, look at that. You're going to be an artist when you grow up, Wyatt said with a kind voice. He was pretty good with Clementine. She was nervous around him at first, but since he liked hanging out with Lee, Vince, Justin, and Bud, she eventually relaxed when around him. Thanks, Clementine said with a smile. Here, Vince said, as he sat down on the ground with Danielle on his lap. Show me how you color. He looked over to Clementine and he asked, Hey, Clem, won't mind if I borrow a coloring book and crayons? I don't mind, Clementine said with a smile. Thank you, Vince said. He picked up a nearby coloring book and placed the crayons between the two girls. He brought a pink crayon and said, You like pink? The toddler nodded her head in response. Okay, you can color with pink, Vince said. The toddler nodded again and started to color. Lee sat down next to Clementine as she colored. I missed you today. I wish you'd not go out, Clementine said. Lee looked over the toddler and she had a frown on her face. Sorry, sweet pea, Lee said, but I have to go out there. I have to help the group. Clementine nodded before she went back to drawing. Lee wished that she could stay and watch her for the whole time, but he knew he gotta help the group. Clementine then looked around the motor inn and she asked, Where'd everyone go? They went out to get something to eat, Lee said. Where? Clementine asked with a curious look. Lee looked up to Vince and Wyatt before he turned back to the toddler. A dairy farm, Lee said. Clementine frowned and she pouted. I want to go, she said. You will next time. We'll take you down, Lee said. Clementine stood up and she said, I go now. Clementine demanded. Lee was surprised. It wasn't like her to act this way. Honey, we don't know the people who own the farm, Lee said. I go, Clementine exclaimed. She still wasn't listening. Lee was wondering if she was getting into her terrible twos. He would have to make sure that they wouldn't last long. He just decided to get her to calm down even more before starting to get stern. Lee shook his head and said, We'll go next time. Now please settle down. I go, I go, I go, Clementine exclaimed. She started to throw a temper tantrum. Hot tears then formed in her eyes. She started to cry again, but Lee leaned over and pulled her in with a strong set of arms. He wasn't going to paddle her. He would have just saved that as a last resort. Why are you acting this way? Lee asked in a stern voice. I want to go to the farm, Clementine sobbed. She hiccuped between her sentence. Okay, I'll take you down there next time, but I don't want to see you throwing a fit, Clementine, Lee said. He then relaxed his grip and hugged her. He figured that starting out a passive and then becoming assertive would be a benefit on Clementine's growth and development, more than anything else. He started to rub the girl's back. The girl was starting to calm down as she huffed. Clementine, I didn't take you down because I want to keep you safe. Strangers are dangerous. Do you understand? Lee said in a kinder tone of voice. Clementine nodded her head in response, but Lee wasn't satisfied with that. Repeat what I said, Lee said. Stranger bad, Clementine said. Good job, Lee said. He gave a pat on her back. She was now calm. Are you okay now? You still mad? I'm not mad anymore, Clementine said. Good. I love you, Lee said. I love you too, Clementine said as she looked up and with a smile on her face. Lee knew that she didn't really act well with yelling, so he had to try to avoid that. One time Katja yelled at her because apparently she didn't listen. Afterwards, she ran into the room that she shared with Lee and didn't come out until Lee came back from the run and did some coax to get her to come out. After that, they all learned that she hated yelling, but from it, she learned to listen to when told not to do something, especially if Katya was telling her not to do something. "All right, you can go back to coloring," Lee said. "Okay," Clementine said. She got up from his lap and went to do coloring. "What's wrong?" Vince asked. Lee then looked over back at what Vince had meant. He was looking down at the girl's care. She had stopped coloring and was now doing something else. Lee had to bite his tongue to prevent himself from laughing. The 2-year-old in Vince's lap was grunting and did the famous poop face. Lee had seen Clementine do that same a few times. She would just stop whenever she was make that face while grunting. A load in her diaper, Wyatt had the same look as Lee when he looked to see Clementine, who was unaware of the situation. Soon the girl stopped grunting and her face returned to normal. Vince frowned. "Oh no, you didn't do what I think you just did, right?" Vince said. Clementine sat up and held her nose. "Something stinky," Clementine said. Vince then stood up with his arm around Danielle's waist. "All right, I'm pretty sure that's you," Vince said. "Lee, can I?" "You don't have to ask," Lee interrupted him. "Just go ahead and get her cleaned up. I don't care what you used." "Thanks," Vince said. "Is there a way I can convince you to change her?" "Nope, not at all. That's all you," Lee said. Vince and Groan said, "I'm gonna throw up." He then walked into the room 24 to clean up Danielle. Clementine uncovered her nose and this bad smell disappeared. "Did she poopy?" Clementine asked, which made Wyatt laugh out while Lee chuckled. "Yes, honey, she pooped. Vince is going to change her," Lee said. "Oh my gosh, you just gotta love kids sometimes. They say the funniest things imaginable," Wyatt said. Lee chuckled and then patted Clementine on the back. "Go back to coloring, sweetheart." Clementine seemed hurt by laughing. "Sweetie, we're not laughing at you. You just said something really funny." "Yeah, sorry, Clem, we won't do that anymore," Wyatt said. Clementine smiled before she went back to coloring. A few minutes later, Vince came back outside carrying Danielle. He placed the toddler on the ground next to Clementine, and the older toddler greeted her with a smile. "Hi," Clementine said in a cheery voice. "Hi," Danielle said in a nervous voice. Vince walked over and sat down next to Wyatt. "That was horrible," Vince said. "He didn't even say it loud enough for the girls to hear." "At least it wasn't a blowout," Lee said. "You remember when Clementine did that once? It ruined her shirt and he had to give her a cold bath immediately after. He had to enlist Katya's help that day." Vince scoffed and said, "Do you ever get used to it?" "Yeah, over time. It's just part of life," Lee said. "Yeah, let's hope this part doesn't last long," Vince said. Both men chuckled in response. The rest of the day continued as normal. The girls eventually got bored of coloring and just wanted to play hide and seek. The three men had no choice but to play. They were surprised to see that the two toddlers were getting along so well. After a while, Wyatt and Carly switched jobs. He took over watch and she played with the girls. "All right, one last game of hide and seek and then we need to get some food for you girls, okay?" Lee said. "Okay," both girls said with smiles. Danielle had opened up over more the course of the afternoon. "All right, I'm going to start counting," Lee said. He closed his eyes and he started to count. 1, 2, 3. He heard Carly whisper, "Come on, this way." 4, 5, 6, Lee counted. He heard the footsteps became fainter as he counted. 7, 8, 9, 10. Lee opened his eyes and said, "Ready or not, here I come," Lee said. He looked around the motor inn for the two toddlers, accompanying the adult. However, when they were nowhere in sight, so Lee had checked upstairs to the second story. "Aw, man," Vince said, as he and Danielle had been hiding, staying flat on the ground of the second story. "He'll find us," Danielle giggled. "Yeah, I thought this was a good spot too," Vince said as he got up. "I'll give it to you. That was a good spot," Lee said. "I still need to find Clem and Carly." "Good luck," Vince said. Lee then nodded and went downstairs. He went towards his room next. He looked inside, but having to check under the beds first. "Nope, not there," Lee said. He then heard giggling from the closet. Lee smirked and went to the closet next. He opened to see Carly while having an arm around Clementine's waist to hold her. The toddler laughed and giggled upon being found. That was a good spot, Lee said. We tried, Carly said. Come here, Sweet Pea, Lee said as he picked her up from Carly's grasp and carried her on his hip. Well, I'll go get something for them to eat, Carly said. Sounds good, thanks, Lee said. Of course, Carly said. She then walked out of the room and was soon followed by Lee, who was carrying Clementine in his arms.